taking place in the far future on the planet of Pluto. This story sees the Doctor and Leela encounter a civilization struggling under the severe burden brought upon them by extreme taxation on the poor as a result of greed. I really like that as a starting premise for the story. I do enjoy when the show takes on politics relevant to our world and portrays them in this somewhat science fiction way, and that was one of my favorite aspects of this serial, seeing just how much the severe taxation had an effect on people. There's a great scene quite early on in this family show where the Doctor and Leela manage to stop this worker from committing suicide.
Magnificent view, isn't it? How high is this building?
1,000 meters.
1,000 meters? Why? Are we interrupting something?
What do you say, citizen?
Somehow I have the impression you're thinking of killing yourself.
It's the taxes.
What?
The taxes. I can't pay the taxes.
Oh, the taxes, my dear old thing. All you need is a wily accountant. Would you care for a jelly baby?
Family show. And from there, our duo start to learn about just how horrible the working and living conditions on Pluto really are. And this takes us into the rest of the story. And I really do like getting to see the Doctor encounter a situation where people are living with very real problems and work to actually do something about those issues. This is one of the cases where the serial genuinely did a solid job of getting me invested in this situation and the problems that these people were dealing with.
Can't make ends meet. Probably too many economists in the government.
These taxes, they are like sacrifices to tribal gods?
Well, roughly speaking, but paying tax is more painful.
Well, then the people should rise up and slaughter their oppressors.
And all of the explorations of those problems are legitimately interesting, from the structure of everything to all of the insight we get into just how tough their lives can be, which was illustrated really well right at the start of the story. In terms of the pacing and the flow of this one, I think that's handled rather well. I definitely found the first couple of parts to be the most interesting, where we are first getting introduced to everything and learning about these different groups of people and their involvement in the story. But I did find most of the serial to be quite good, and I was entertained throughout. It's honestly just a good amount of fun. There are a number of supporting characters throughout, and they largely do a fine job. Most of them come from the group of people we meet early on who actually have chosen not to live in this capitalist society built upon Pluto, favoring hiding underground and stealing from those in charge to live out their lives. That was a nice added element to the story, and I thought that getting more perspectives of people who had been disenfranchised by this system and the people in charge helped to give the story more dimensionality to it, so I did appreciate that. One thing particularly worth noting about this serial is its main villain, of which we will find two in the form of Haid and the Collector. Haid is the first antagonist we are introduced to right at the start of the story, where we see how much this worker he has a meeting with had to pay simply for his father to have a peaceful death. Yeah, we'll get back to that later. And we immediately learn about what an absolutely callous and horrible person Haid is from just this scene. We see the greed of the system these people are being oppressed under highlighted right from the beginning, so I did quite like this take on a villain that does come in the form of this really destructive and familiar society, where he just represents the system, which obviously was created by people and he is a part of it, but it's a systemic issue that causes great harm to loads of people. And one thing I found interesting was that even though this actor was rather over the top in his performance, he has this big bombastic voice while also speaking in what is honestly kind of a silly way. He still kind of worked for me. Despite being this very ridiculous villain in a lot of ways, I didn't really find myself getting disinterested in his character. I thought he worked as this utterly ridiculous authority figure. And though he may be exaggerated in terms of the portrayal within this serial, he represents a very real kind of person, or at the very least a very real kind of system.
It's a question of manpower. I simply haven't got sufficient staff.
It is against company policy to give supportive aid to the civil administration. We run a purely fiscal operation.
Your pinnacle. A 5% increase in protection tax would repay the company. Its name be praised.
Good thinking, Haid. You tempt me.
And the same held true for the Collector, even more so considering his ridiculous voice, where I kind of liked him as a villain, possibly despite, but also possibly in part because of how ridiculous he was. I think there is something about making these particular characters who are in charge so cartoonish and over the top that I kind of get. I completely understand if they were too much for some people, particularly the Collector, but I couldn't help but find them to be decent and effective adversaries that nicely filled the roles they needed to for this serial. As always, it is worth bringing up our main duo, Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, who are solid within this one. I am still enjoying their very unique dynamic, and I really appreciate how Leela is really so drastically different to all of the companions who have come before her. She is continuing to grow on me more and more, and I enjoy seeing this companion in particular put into all of these different kinds of situations.
Where are we going?
I don't know. Why did you run?
Well, he ran first.
Well, that's no answer.
Why did you run?
I don't know. Odd, isn't it?
Perhaps everyone runs from the taxman.
He says you're right.
As said, the Doctor is great. He definitely has a somewhat different presence in these stories with Leela, but he still shines and is genuinely really good, having some very enjoyable interactions with both Leela and the supporting characters. We also get a bit more of K9 in this story than usual, and I have admitted to enjoying the character, and I still do here, but sometimes I can't help but feel that he is poorly used, because I feel that he should be able to be more helpful than he is in these stories. But here there are points when he'll just sit on the back of a vehicle not doing much, or will disobey the Doctor's orders, and it doesn't feel like the story really knows what to do with the character. But I still liked him for the most part, even if he was partly mishandled. If I were to make some criticisms of this story, though I did really enjoy it, there's not much that I could specifically point to as being bad. I suppose the serial wasn't as tight as it necessarily could have been in terms of being constantly solid, but it still had a lot to like and was well paced. The villains definitely could have been more menacing, but I also don't think that they really needed to be for what the story was doing. The supporting cast could have been stronger on the whole, but they worked well enough regardless, so there's no one thing that I can point to as a failing of this story, because most of this one is just rather solid. Overall, I found this to be a really enjoyable serial with a lot to like. We have a really good mix of relevant political elements blended with an engaging story, a decent supporting cast, and a couple of solid main characters. This is definitely a pretty strong story, and I'm going to give The Sunmakers a rating of 7.75 out of 10. And that does it for today, everybody. If you have any thoughts on this serial, feel free to share them down below, and I do hope to see you around on some Sunday in the potentially near future for a review of Underworld. And if not, that is absolutely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.